Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this special presentation of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Spirit of Enterprise Award presented to Representative Elise Stefanik of New York's 21st District. I'm Sarah Armstrong with the U.S. Chamber, and I'll be moderating today's event. In a few moments, we'll hear from President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Suzanne Clark, who will join the representative for a conversation. But before I get started, I want to take a moment to thank our partners for today's event. We have a fantastic group of chambers who work tirelessly on behalf of businesses in their communities in New York. So thanks to the Adirondack Chamber, the Business Council of New York State, the Greater Watertown North Country Chamber, the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber, and the Saratoga Chamber. We very much appreciate your partnership and support. So for today's event, we'll start with a discussion between Representative Stefanik and Suzanne Clark, and then we'll take some questions at the end. If you'd like to ask a question of either the representative or Suzanne, please use the chat function located on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll try and take as many questions as possible at the end. So with that, I think we can get started. Suzanne, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. We are absolutely delighted today to be hosting this event with our partners and speaking to all of you in the great state of New York. As you all know, Congresswoman Stefanik is a rising star in Congress, a complete business champion in Washington, and perhaps most importantly to all of you, just a steadfast leader for your district. Congressman, we are so happy to be with you, so happy to be able to partner with you. We were hoping we'd be able to do this in Lake Placid like we discussed last fall, but here we are. And in any case, it's a real privilege to present you with the Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award. We so appreciate your leadership on priorities that are good for the economy, good for employers, and good for workers. On issues ranging from trade and healthcare to retirement savings and skills training, and most recently, your work to help the company both shut down the virus and reopen the economy. You represent the kind of leadership that is too often missing in Washington. You're tough, you're pragmatic, and you're effective. You're committed to getting the job done. And you understand what's so important to us at the U.S. Chamber. You understand that helping businesses and supporting business policies supports families and communities. For those reasons, you easily earned the Spirit of Enterprise Award this year. In fact, you're one of the Chamber's strongest allies with a 97% lifetime score on our congressional scorecard. So we thank you for your support for the pro-growth agenda and for your leadership and just being on the get it done train. So we look forward to hearing more about that work in just a minute. And I think I'm supposed to turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you, Suzanne, and congratulations, Representative. We're going to hear from you in just a moment, but first I'd like to go back to Suzanne and have her tell us a little bit more about the Spirit of Enterprise Award and what it means for business.
Well, I think that most of you in this I don't even know what we call these things anymore. This event, I think the word webinar is so awful. Let's call it event. I think most of you at this event understand that the U.S. Chamber is the world's largest big business organization, that we represent every size, every sector, every industry and region in the country. And one of the most important ways that we represent those members, our members, is to advocate for pro-growth policies in the Congress. And so we have had for a long time a scorecard where we list business priorities and score members of Congress against it. And, you know, we like to think that the Spirit of Enterprise Award is kind of like a good housekeeping seal of approval. We proudly stand, and we want to proudly stand with lawmakers who have demonstrated, not just with words, but with actions, their commitment to free enterprise and growing the economy. We know that that creates opportunities for our members and for their constituents.
Thank you, Suzanne. Now, over the past year, we've had some pretty significant changes to the scorecard. Can you explain for the audience what's changed and why it's important that we made those changes?
Sure. I mean, on one hand, let's talk about what hasn't changed, right? For over 40 years, we've been listing business priorities and watching how members of Congress do against that list. But we also added something this time, which was to create leadership and bipartisanship awards for members who are really, as I said a minute ago, like this representative, willing to be on the get it done train. You know, we believe at the Chamber that good governance is what we need. We need people who want to come to Washington and govern. And we also believe that if we want meaningful, lasting, you need buy-in from both sides of the aisle. So we really wanted to make sure that we weren't rewarding bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship, but rewarding leaders who were coming together in the middle to really get things done.
Great, thank you so much, Suzanne. Well, now I'm going to shift over to the representative. Again, congratulations on receiving the Spirit of Enterprise Award. We're so happy to have you here with us today. First of all, several of the most important recent business priorities have been bipartisan achievements, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement and the CARES Act. And I know the business community really appreciates your leadership on both. First, let's talk a little bit about USMCA, which entered into force just last week. Congresswoman, what does this new deal mean for businesses in your district?
Sarah, thank you so much for this opportunity. Can you hear me all right? Am I coming through on video?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Suzanne, for this opportunity. It's an honor to host the U.S. Chamber while this is virtual. We have done lots of U.S. Chamber events in the district with our local and regional chambers of commerce. So I appreciate the recognition for my pro-business record and pro-economic growth record on behalf of the North Country and New York. Specifically when it comes to USMCA, this was one of the #1 economic priorities of my region over the past few years, was getting USMCA across the finish line. As you know, and particularly our local chambers understand, our proximity to Canada, we are very much a joint economy with our northern borders. 20% of the workforce in the greater Plattsburgh region, for example, is dependent upon US-Canadian trade, and people go to work every day either at Canadian businesses or trade-related businesses. So having a stronger trade agreement that gives US manufacturers, farmers, and small businesses better access to the North American market is a win. What also is a win, specifically to drill down a little bit more, is making sure that our supply chain, which we have many manufacturers in the region that have a supply chain that goes across the border multiple times, that we're able to cut the red tape and get rid of the bureaucratic things that could fall in the way from that. In addition, for our agricultural interests, our dairy farms have greater access to the Canadian marketplace. That has been something that the New York Farm Bureau has advocated for decades, really my whole life, and we were able to get that done. So it's very exciting for the region, and it's a huge win that it is finally, it went into force just recently, and our farmers, our small businesses and manufacturers are very optimistic about the economic potential of this new USMCA. So a big win for our local chambers, our local employers, and really the entire United States and North America to have such a strong trade agreement.
It was so important, and Suzanne, passing the USMCA was one of the Chamber's most significant priorities in recent years. Two questions for you. Why was it so important to our nation's economy, and why is it so important to the Chamber that it was a bipartisan effort? Suzanne?
Sorry. Look, I think the Congresswoman just said it really well. Trade with Mexico and Canada is absolutely crucial to our economy. We know that that trade supports 12 million American jobs, and you know that's all 50 states. It's 800,000 in New York alone. So we know how important trade is. We also felt strongly that the passage of USMCA would show the world that we were open for business, and in fact, it did create momentum to start other trade agendas and bills moving. As for the bipartisanship, not only did we think it was the only way to get it done, but when you have such a strong bipartisan showing, it makes it really hard for the next administration to come in and undo it. So the strong bipartisanship meant that it could be a lasting trade deal, which we know is good for workers, good for communities, and good for our country.
Thank you so much. Now, while we're on the subject of the border, Representative, we understand that the prolonged closure of the U.S.-Canada border has had some significant impact on the North Country, since so many of the businesses there depend on cross-border travel. What are you doing to address this, and when do you think the border will reopen?
It's a great question, Sarah. I've had numerous conversations, even this morning, about northern border specific issues related to tourism, related to individuals that own property or have family on either side of the border. At the start of this crisis, obviously this is an unprecedented pandemic, once in 100 years, and my priority was making sure that our essential workers, specifically our healthcare workers, our doctors and nurses, were able to continue their life-saving work. We have many Canadians who work at New York hospitals in my district and New York community health centers. I was able to ensure that they were deemed essential so that they were able to continue serving the greater public. And that was based upon a very early conversation with Acting Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. What has been a challenge since then is having bilateral agreement and a gradual reopening plan that's comprehensive. What is challenging about that is it's not just the US who has to agree to a plan, it's also the Canadians as well. So it's been a lot of cross-border conversations that I've had, whether it's the Canadian ambassador to the US, whether it's the Consul General of Quebec, and I'm working to build a bipartisan coalition. I do co-chair the Northern Border Caucus with my colleague from New York State, Brian Higgins, and we just put out a letter with 29 signatories, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, all along northern border districts, advocating for a comprehensive plan. I also think between now and when the border opens up fully, back to how it was before, we need to have some type of reasonable guidance for individuals that have family members on the other side of the borders, that own seasonal homes on the other side of the borders. And another issue of importance in my region is some of the maritime and boating issues. I represent the St. Lawrence River and Lake Champlain, and we've been working with many of our recreational boaters who have had some challenges when it comes to how stringent the Canadians have been when it comes to the, using the waterways. So we're going to continue working through it. It's about strengthening our cross-border dialogue, which we are very good at here, led by our North Country Chamber of Commerce with other chambers in support. But I think having that certainty and a comprehensive plan that both Canada and the US agree to, that's really important for the business community and really for families that have, loved ones on either side of the border.
I'm going to shift gears to the pandemic. The Chamber strongly supported congressional efforts to provide federal relief to help manage the public health and economic crisis, including the CARES Act. Congresswoman, first of all, thank you for all you've done to help businesses get access to federal relief through the Paycheck Protection Program. Is Congress going to pass an additional coronavirus relief package? And if so, what do you think and hope that it will include?
I do anticipate that Congress will pass an additional COVID relief package. I am advocating for an additional COVID relief package. Number one, in New York State, and particularly the counties in my district, I have 194 towns and villages. I have 12 counties. The economic impact and fiscal impact on our counties has been significant. I believe we need some form of local aid and, as much as possible, aid going directly to the counties. I am a co-sponsor of the Bipartisan SMART Act, which would be $500 billion of direct aid to state and municipalities. But importantly, it doesn't have a population cutoff. So no matter how rural your county or municipality may be, you still qualify for that direct federal aid. In addition, I believe that certain industries, whether it's our tourist-related industry, our seasonal businesses, or our hotels and restaurants, are really facing continued challenges. They are doing the best they absolutely can, but this is a long-term struggle, and I believe that we need to make sure that any augmented PPP really focuses on those industries that have been hit particularly hard. I also think we need to continue to look at what's happening in the ag industry. At the start of the COVID crisis, we were having examples of dairy farmers who were dumping just thousands of pounds of milk, and we were able to provide important support through the USDA and previous COVID packages, but that's something from an agricultural district that's really important. In addition, visas is an important issue in my district, whether it's the J-1 visas or the H-2B visas. That continues to be a workforce issue and an area where I've spoken out because that's on top of the COVID-related issues that many small businesses are facing. And then I think liability protection is going to be really important, not just for the business community, but for higher education, for our school districts, for our places of work when it's, whether it's working for the state or county or local governments. And I believe liability reform will be a part of the next package as well.
Now, you did touch a little bit about this, but I want to circle back. Some of the small and seasonal businesses in the tourism and hospitality industry have really been severely impacted by the COVID pandemic. You touched on visas, you touched on liability issues. What more do you think that we should be doing to help support these businesses as they work to reopen?
Well, I think sharing best practices is incredibly important. What I've done in my district at the start of the crisis and throughout the height of the crisis is hosting a number of conference calls and working groups, whether it's tourist-based businesses, whether it's schools, nonprofits, like-minded businesses, to share their best practices, because there was a lot of very creative thinking, and our chambers and economic development organizations did a tremendous job in putting those recommendations out there. I also think when it comes to the seasonal businesses, we have to understand that while many have been impacted this summer, for some businesses, that's where they really earn the majority of their revenue and have the majority of their sales, is that during the high season this year. So there needs to be economic relief that's targeted towards perhaps a lag when these businesses really feel the long-term impact. So again, there's still funds available in the Paycheck Protection Program. The purpose of that program is to ensure that people are able to stay at work and are not laid off as workers. So it's really focused on making sure that the direct aid goes to Main Street, small businesses on Main Street, which near 90% of the funds went to. Seasonal issues have been a challenge. Initially at the start of this crisis, when Department of Treasury and Small Business Administration put out their initial guidance, the eligibility was unworkable for seasonal and tourist-based businesses. And I'm so proud of my district. We essentially wrote the updated guidance with the help of the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce to make sure that seasonal businesses, how they calculated their eligibility and their payroll, was not based upon February of this year, but based upon more where they would be at the high season looking at 2019. So, I've found that the administration has been very open to feedback, to adjustments, making sure that the relief we provide for small businesses is important. But it's hard to predict in terms of where specifically we will be this fall. If we do have an increase of cases, we're going to have to look at additional economic support. What we do know didn't work is the one-size-fits-all in New York State of shutting down the entire state when we had very different numbers in downstate versus upstate. My district was not nearly as impacted with the number of positive COVID cases as the epicenter in downstate New York. So I do think a regionalized approach is important as well, and learning the lessons from looking back over the past few months.
Now let's turn a little bit to unemployment. As businesses are starting to get back to work, reopen their doors, we still have about 20 million workers who remain unemployed. What is being done to help these workers secure a job?
I think we need to make sure the incentives are getting back to work. As I've talked to small businesses and employers, and even some of the editorial pages in my district have said that the incentive of the additional pandemic unemployment assistance, while it was important at the height of the crisis, we need to make sure the incentive is getting folks back to work. That expires the end of July. My focus is potentially looking at back to work bonuses, but also making sure that workforce development and using our local workforce WIOA boards, our workforce development organizations that are already in existence, already connected with the business community and employers, that they have access to funds to get people back to work as quickly as possible if retraining is necessary. And in addition, I think that investment in infrastructure, specifically rural broadband, is going to be a part of that. We have learned that some industries are able to continue their work just in new modern ways, but you need to have that 21st century infrastructure to do that.
Suzanne, let me bring you in on this topic. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Chamber's work to help businesses survive both during the initial shutdown period and then as we're moving into the reopening phase?
Sure. Well, first of all, I again want to echo the Congresswoman's statements about how important the local chambers have been to giving us advice and to helping all the businesses in their community, and also to thank the Congresswoman for her leadership on a number of the issues that she just raised, both past and present, and I was particularly delighted to hear her mention liability protection in the future. So, but with that as a jumping off point, I would just say, we've spent the past 4 months saying no one should go bankrupt, no family should go bankrupt, no business should have to close because of this pandemic. This, as the Congresswoman just said, this once in 100 years event. So what can we do? And that has taken the guys from, our wheelhouse of advocacy. We have supported all of the major aid packages that the Congresswoman just mentioned. We have advocated for all of the business provisions that were ultimately in the CARES Act. And then we turned to making sure that businesses really knew how to access that. We created all kinds of different downloadable guides, had them translated into Spanish. They were downloaded millions of times across the country so that businesses had tools at their disposal. So as we turned our attention to how does the country open safely and sustainably, we had a number of events, of digital toolkits, placards that companies could use to put on their doors, how they could communicate with their customers, just trying to get them the best information and tools possible. We've also, with input from our members, of course, been making policy recommendations for lawmakers, including the need for really good national guidelines instead of heavy-handed regulations. There's no playbook for this. It's been so imperfect. We've had such imperfect information that a one-size-fits-all regulatory environment won't be as nimble as local on-the-ground leaders need to really safeguard their communities. We have been a leading voice calling for liability protection. That is a big priority for us coming up in the next phase. We hope that some kind of safe harbor will be included. I'm bolstered by the Congresswoman's comments. And now we're really spending some time thinking about, we can't shut down the virus and we can't reopen the economy until we stop this latest increase, this latest spread. And so we sent a letter last week to the White House task force and also to the governor saying, we need national guidance on masks. The patchwork of local ordinances is not working. We're hearing from businesses and chambers all over the country that in the absence of national guidelines and local implementation, the differences are just too extreme. And what that means is that you have customer confrontations and you have all kinds of lawsuits against businesses because they're not forcing people to wear masks, lawsuits against businesses because they are forcing people to wear masks. Business owners aren't the experts in this. We need medical opinion, public health experts to set these guidelines and not make business some kind of enforcer. But look, we want to see people wear masks. We want to see people get back to work. We want to see the economy reopen, not go back into the kind of shutdown that we had earlier this spring. So long road ahead. We're going to need talented lawmakers like the Congresswoman, and we're going to need talented chambers like those that are here to come together and protect every business and family that we can.
I just want to make one comment. Suzanne highlighted our incredible chambers, and I really want to echo that. I know the U.S. Chamber talked about the resources they put out at the national level. Our local chambers rose to this occasion and rose to this challenge. Many of the chambers were sending out daily emails with guidance to the business community, answering questions both at the federal and state level. Every single chamber that's on this call has participated in numerous conference calls where I was able to answer questions, the chamber was able to answer questions, and our state electeds were able to answer questions as well. So I really just want to highlight how integral they have been to the economic recovery and rebuilding that's existed in my district. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight, and this is an important issue for the U.S. Chamber, and I think it needs to be really targeted towards our small and regional chambers across the country. They were not eligible for PPP, and our nonprofits were eligible, small businesses were eligible, and chambers really took a hit at the local level in terms of their businesses contributing to them because the business community was in such a challenging position. So I strongly support our local and regional chambers of commerce having access to the Paycheck Protection Program because those are critical jobs and critical resources at a time of crisis like this.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Thank you very much.
And that's a perfect pivot point. Thank you, Representative, for highlighting the work of our chamber partners. They're such important advocates for the business community, and their relationship with the U.S. Chamber is extremely important to us. So I'm going to take a couple of questions that they posed for you. So I'm going to read the first couple of ones that came in. The first question comes from Heather Burchetti, President and CEO of the Business Council of New York State. Her question is, on the topic of federal legislation for a safe harbor for businesses that comply with safety standards during COVID-19, would such a federal law preempt state law?
First of all, hi, Heather. I can see your picture. We've done events together, and I've been able to partner with the Business Council of New York State on a number of federal issues. You are such an important voice for upstate New York and broadly for the business community. On the issue of federal preemption, we are absolutely looking at making sure, and this touches upon Suzanne's point that she noted, it's challenging to have a patchwork when we're dealing with liability protections. So our intent at the federal level is to ensure that that preempts the state so that there is one standard and one liability reform standard across the country. I think that's going to be really important. Again, the details have not been hammered out in the negotiated package, but that's the direction I think we're heading in, is federal preemption.
Very good. The next question comes from Gary Douglas, President and CEO of the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce. Gary says, thank you so much for your border-related advocacy. Would you discuss continuing efforts to obtain some expanded categories of allowed cross-border travel ahead of July 21st?
Yes, Gary has been a true partner on a day-to-day basis throughout this crisis, and the North Country Chamber sends out daily updates to its very large membership across the district, keeping them updated not only on border issues, but really everything. They also hosted a number of informational sessions for businesses, whether it was questions at the state level, questions on how to write guides, that the New York State Department of Health required for small businesses as they reopened up. On the border issues, as I mentioned, I am co-chair of the Northern Border Caucus. Brian Higgins, who is my colleague, my Democratic co-chair, this caucus is bipartisan. We did issue that letter both to Canada and to the US, advocating for a comprehensive strategy to reopen safely our northern border. And I think in the interim, we need to focus on some of the very specific issues that come up on a daily basis. And my office actually does casework on this on a daily basis for families that have family members on either side of the border, or for homeowners and property owners on either side of the border. That is an extremely challenging issue day to day. Again, not a day goes by when we don't get a call about this in my office. And I think there needs to be flexibility for those two buckets to make sure that they're able to continue that cross-border safely. And I think we can do that by temperature checks, by testing, by working with CBP and our Canadian counterparts. So there is a way to safely and gradually reopen the border. We just need to provide that certainty to the community.
Thank you. Our next question is from Todd Shimkus, President of the Saratoga Chamber of Commerce. He writes, with respect to our hospitality and tourism industry, these businesses are open. They're working hard. I'll suspect they'll make it through the summer, but his fear is that they won't make enough money this summer to survive the winter. This could be further challenged should there be a resurgence of the virus in the fall. What, if anything, is under consideration to help these firms survive beyond this summer?
Yeah, hi, Todd. Thanks for the question. Todd has been another true partner in this and has really been a tremendous voice for the broader Saratoga County region. And hospitality, retail, restaurants have been hit extremely hard. And on top of that, some of the challenges that are unique to the region with the Saratoga race course not having human guests, but having the horses run, that's going to be a challenge to work through. I believe that, well, the good news is if you look at some of the indicators nationally, retail is up. People, I think, are eager to get back out there safely because we've learned a lot about this virus in terms of it impacts those who are the most vulnerable and seniors. And people know that they can take precautions. They have access to tests, which are widely available in our community with support from the federal government. So I do think that there is an eagerness to get back out there. And I think as we work together as a community, encouraging support for small businesses, even what the Saratoga Chamber does in terms of the reopening and the biggest ribbon cutting ever in Saratoga Springs, that was really exciting to read about and to be a part of getting us to that point. But I do think as we really see where we are in the fall, the SBA, in terms of the Paycheck Protection Program, we may need to make that available for a second round with specific industry targets to hospitality, tourist-based businesses, retail, restaurants.
Great. And our last question from the CEOs of the chambers is from Michael Patel, the president and CEO of the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce. Michael wrote, "Thank you, Congresswoman Stefanik and your office for helping the Adirondack Regional Chamber add language to the Paycheck Protection Program guidance regarding seasonal business clarification and eligibility. With the recently signed USMCA, the focus has been on opening Canada and Mexico to U.S. goods. But we believe that the USMCA also leveled the playing field for U.S. businesses on goods coming into the U.S. Could you expand on this a bit?"
Absolutely. So on the seasonal piece that Michael touched upon on the front end, I had a number of calls with the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce, information sessions, Q&As with local small businesses and families in that part of my district. And we have a lot of seasonal employers there, especially if you think about Lake George and the greater Adirondack region. And one of the issues at the outset was the way that the Paycheck Protection Program calculated what you were eligible for was initially that February 2020 payroll. And for seasonal businesses, that was unworkable in the sense that that was not reflective of where they would be in March, April, and May as they're ramping up for the high season, which is the summer up here. So we were able to work to rewrite that with the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce and get it turned around within 24 hours with updated guidance from the Department of Treasury. So that was a big win. In terms of the Canadian good access to the U.S. marketplace, again, we have people that do shopping day to day across the border, and it's part of their daily life. This had been an issue for a very long time. The Canadians had not budged on the de minimis cutoff for the value of goods coming into the U.S., and now it's been increased to $150. So that's also a win of USMCA, just to keep that cross-border commerce going day to day as we hopefully safely reopen the northern border as we get further along in this year.
All right, thank you. Well, now we're going to turn over to any questions that the audience has. And again, thank you for all those questions that the Chamber CEOs presented to us. If you want to have a question for either the representative or for Suzanne, please use that live chat function in the right-hand side of your screen. I do see we have a follow-up question from Gary Douglas. And I believe this question is for you, Suzanne. Is the U.S. Chamber behind the Congresswoman's call for the U.S. and Canada to create a reopening decision-making framework for the shared border before another simplistic closure extension on July 21st?
Yes. That's the simple answer, but let me just expand and say, look, these economies are just completely interconnected. As the representative said a minute ago, the families are interconnected, businesses are interconnected, and just we are not for unilateral border crossings. So yes, we're happy to work with this team and be part of a solution.
Very good.
Well, I'll take you up on that. I will take you up on that, Suzanne. And Gary, thank you for pressing this issue. This has been a bipartisan concern, and we will refer you to the letter that Brian Higgins in my office led. It has 29 signatories, so Republicans and Democrats across the northern border advocating for a comprehensive guidance and a comprehensive plan to safely reopen the northern border. In my conversations with the administration, specifically with Acting Secretary Chad Wolf at Department of Homeland Security, we've talked at length about the differences of the northern border and the southern border, different needs, different security concerns, different economic issues. So I really want to focus and make sure that the northern border is understood, and the unique perspective that our regions bring is understood by both our policymakers on the U.S. side, but we're also having those conversations with our Canadian counterparts.
I have your letter right in front of me, and I'll look forward to being able to talk about it live.
Great.
Well,
I'm not showing any more questions, so
maybe I can.
Yeah,
maybe I can jump in for a second, Sarah, and just also tell the representative belated happy birthday and how much I enjoyed seeing her 4th of July post. It was real Americana up there, and it was great to see, especially for those of us who weren't having much of a 4th of July. So it was just really great to see. So happy birthday.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. And I will brag on the creativity of our community here. We are a district that always has lots of parades, lots of celebrations, lots of festivals every summer. So it was a real disappointment as many of those were canceled, but our local communities were incredibly innovative. One of the parades that you probably saw pictures of was in Hamilton County in Speculator. We had what was called a reverse parade, where the people who are normally walking through or have floats, so me and other people, we would be on the side of the road in one spot. We were masked, and we made sure that we had all of the attendees sign in ahead of time. We registered, and then the guests, so the people in the community, drove through in their cars. So there was that safe social distance. So it was a reverse parade. I was really blown away by hundreds and hundreds of cars driving through here participating. So that was really exciting. And then we had a wonderful ribbon cutting of a New American Legion, and it was a socially distanced ceremony with lots of veterans in our community. And then we did sort of a socially distant parade on one of the fire trucks driving through town. So we love Independence Day. We love our nation's history in this district, and it was really exciting to see the community was so creative.
Well, it helped me feel more patriotic, and I will say I do feel as hard as this situation has been between the pandemic and then the economic recession, and then what we've seen with this kind of a race for an equality of opportunity solution, as hard as all of this has been, it has been wonderful to see Americans be resilient and gritty and find new ways to celebrate each other and be together in a safe way. And so I think those examples of kind of American resilience have been wonderful to see. I think the birthday parades may never end. Kids may just grow up always wanting their friends to drive by their houses with birthday posters forever now, right?
It is true. And the business community and many of our members of our local chambers, I mean, every day in the local paper, there would be another business stepping up in innovative ways, whether it was transitioning their manufacturing to make hand sanitizer, whether it was transitioning. There's a flag maker in my district that started making masks. You have examples of quilting groups of senior women who started making masks and PPE gowns for our healthcare workers. Of course, now we have seen the PPE and the testing as we have surged that capacity across the country with much support from the federal government. We were able to significantly increase that, but people stepped up in incredibly innovative ways. Donations to food banks from our local farmers surged and increased. So it really showed the resilience and the grit, as you said, Suzanne, of our business community, but really as our community in general, as fellow Americans.
Well, those are great words for you too, and we just really appreciate our working partnership in Washington. We appreciate your focus on business and what a job means to a community and to a family and to our country, and we count ourselves very lucky to have you as a partner in so much of what we want to do for the American business community. So thank you again, and congratulations again.
Well, thank you so much. I am honored, and thanks to the entire team at the U.S. Chamber, and also thank you to all the chambers in my district who we partner with on a daily and weekly basis. They are such incredible leaders in our community, and I always tell my colleagues I have the best chambers in the country in my district. I know my colleagues would probably argue with that, but I know Sarah and others have worked with them many years now, and they just really rose to this occasion. So thanks for this opportunity to highlight these important business issues and the way we can safely get folks back to work.
Well, thank you both very much. Suzanne, appreciate you joining us. And of course, Representative, congratulations. It's good to see you again. And we appreciate everybody joining us on the call today. And finally, a special thanks again to our partner chambers who are so critical to the business community in the North Country and across the state of New York. So thanks so much for joining us. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,